You know, it's funny how sometimes the most devastating events in history don't just destroy things. Sometimes a moment of absolute collapse becomes the very fire where a new identity gets forged. And today, we're diving into one of the most powerful examples of that ever, the Babylonian Exile. This is really the heart of the whole story. It's the big question we're going to tackle. How does a people, ripped from their homes, with everything they held sacred turned to dust, not only survive, but completely reinvent themselves and change the world in the process? Okay, so to really feel the impact of the fall, we've got to understand what was at stake. So let's rewind the clock and set the scene in the ancient Near East. Now, at the center of all this is the temple. For the people of Judah, you have to understand this was not just some big fancy church. No, this was considered the literal dwelling place of God on earth. It was the center of their universe, their culture, their entire identity. Everything revolved around it. The entire region at this time was just a mess, a total powder keg. First, in 612 BCE, the old regional bully, the Assyrian Empire, just crumbles. Poof, gone. This leaves this huge power vacuum. Then, just a few years later, Judah's own king, Josiah, is killed in battle, which sparks chaos at home. And who steps into this void? A brand new, absolutely ruthless superpower, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, led by the infamous Nebuchadnezzar II. This left the little kingdom of Judah in a terrible spot, squeezed between these massive empires. So the end didn't happen overnight. It wasn't one single battle, it was more like a catastrophe in slow motion. A series of crushing blows that played out over almost 20 years. Nebuchadnezzar was incredibly strategic about this. In 605 BCE, he comes in and skims the cream of the crop. He takes the nobles, the intellectuals, the skilled workers. Think of it as a brain drain. Then, after another rebellion in 597, he comes back for round two, deports the king and thousands more of the elite class. He installs a puppet king, Zedekiah, but when he rebels too, Nebuchadnezzar has had enough. He decides he's going to solve his Jerusalem problem once and for all, and that final brutal act began with a siege. For 18 agonizing months, the Babylonian army just surrounded Jerusalem, cutting it off from the world. I mean, can you imagine the starvation, the sickness, the sheer desperation inside those walls, knowing the most powerful army on earth is just waiting for you to die? And then, in the year 587 BCE, the walls were breached. This is it. This is the year it all came to an end. The kingdom of Judah, which had existed for centuries, was just extinguished. The destruction was absolute. The Babylonians didn't just conquer Jerusalem, they tried to erase it from memory. The temple was burned to the ground. The palace was turned to rubble. The city walls were torn down stone by stone. And the fate of the last king, Zedekiah, was a horrifying public spectacle. It was a brutal message to anyone else who might think of defying Babylon. Okay, so now we shift the scene. We're moving from the smoking ruins of Judah to the canals and rivers of Babylon. The physical war was over, but a much different, more profound battle, a spiritual one, was just beginning. This was the terrifying question that haunted the exiles. Everything they had ever believed in seemed to be a lie. Their God was supposed to protect this city. Their temple was supposed to be his home forever. This wasn't just a military defeat, it was a deep spiritual crisis. It was a crisis of faith. This crisis hit right at the heart of their entire worldview, something we call Zion theology. Basically, it was the core belief that God had made an unbreakable promise. Jerusalem was his eternal city, and a king from David's line would always rule. And in 587 BCE, that bedrock belief was pulverized. I mean, if God's own house can be burned to the ground, what's left to believe in? Well, what was left was a revolution. This crisis forced one of the most incredible transformations in history. With no temple to make sacrifices in, faith had to turn inward. It became about something you could carry with you, sacred texts and the law. With no king to lead them, leadership shifted to the people who could interpret those texts, the prophets and the scribes. A religion tied to a single place became a religion of a portable book. And because of that, this period of exile became one of the most creative and important moments in literary history. It was right there, in Babylon, far from home, that the community began to collect, edit, and write down the stories, laws, and prophecies that would eventually become the Hebrew Bible, a text that would shape 3 of the world's major religions. But the story doesn't end in Babylon. After decades of exile, the political map of the world was about to be redrawn once again, opening the door for an unexpected, almost unbelievable chance at a comeback. So in 538 BCE, the Babylonian Empire, which seemed so invincible, is itself conquered. A new power rises from the east, the Persians, led by the legendary Cyrus the Great. And Cyrus had a completely different philosophy on how to run an empire. Where the Babylonians ruled through terror and deportation, Cyrus practiced a kind of revolutionary tolerance. His famous edict was a political earthquake. It basically announced that all the exiled peoples, including the Jews, were free to go home. And he didn't just allow it, he encouraged it, even offering financial help to rebuild their temple. And so, the long journey home began. It wasn't easy, and it happened in stages over many years. But finally, by 516 BCE, a new temple, the Second Temple, was standing again in Jerusalem. And this moment kicked off a whole new era in Jewish history that would last for almost 600 years. So, when you put it all together, what's the ultimate legacy of this incredible story of destruction and renewal? Well, the impact of the Babylonian exile echoes all the way down to our own time. Think about it. This trauma forced a rethinking of God, which led to a stronger, more universal form of monotheism. It literally created the Bible. It forged an identity that could survive anywhere because it wasn't tied to land, but to a story and a shared way of life. It gave us the very idea of a diaspora, a community thriving far from its ancestral homeland. And it even led to new institutions, like the synagogue, a place for worship without a temple. In short, the disaster gave birth to modern Judaism as we know it. And that brings us to a final big question for you to think about. The Babylonian exile really forces us to ask, what is it that truly holds a people together? Is it the soil under their feet? The walls of their city? Or is it the shared story they carry in their hearts? A story so powerful it can survive fire and forge a future out of the ashes.